The morning sun was just beginning to rise over Atlanta's skyline when Dr. Maya Richardson checked her watch for the third time. It was 5:45 a.m., and she stood in line at the premium check-in counter of Atlanta International Airport. Her flight to San Francisco, AA 673, was scheduled to depart at 7:30 a.m., and she wanted to make sure everything went smoothly. Maya was not just any passenger. At 38 years old, she had become one of the most respected cardiothoracic surgeons in Georgia. Her dark brown eyes, though tired from a late-night emergency surgery, remained alert as she observed the bustling airport around her. She had pulled her black curly hair into a neat bun, wearing a crisp navy blazer and matching pants, her usual travel outfit. "Next, please," called the check-in agent, and Maya stepped forward with her ID and platinum frequent flyer card ready. The agent's eyes widened slightly as she looked at Maya's status level. "Oh, Dr. Richardson, welcome. I see you're in first class today, seat 2A. The agent's professional tone carried a hint of surprise that Maya had grown used to over the years. As she waited for her boarding pass, Maya's mind wandered to the medical conference where she would be giving a keynote speech about her groundbreaking heart surgery technique. This method had saved hundreds of lives, including a 5-year-old boy just last week. She smiled, remembering his parents' tears of joy after the successful operation. Security was quick thanks to her TSA pre-check status, another perk of flying over 100,000 miles each year. Maya grabbed her laptop bag and small carry-on. She never checked luggage, a habit she developed early in her career when every minute counted. Walking through the terminal, she stopped at her favorite coffee shop, where the morning barista, James, already knew her order. The usual, Dr. Richardson. Vanilla latte with an extra shot. James grinned, already reaching for a cup. "You know me too well, James," Maya replied with a warm smile. This small interaction was one of the few normal moments she could count on during her frequent travels. At gate 7, Maya sat down and opened her laptop to review her presentation one last time. Around her, other first-class passengers began gathering, mostly older white men in business suits. A few younger tech entrepreneurs she could spot by their casual attire and expensive headphones. She noticed their quick glances in her direction, the subtle double takes that she had learned to ignore years ago. When boarding began, Maya waited patiently for her group to be called. "Now boarding our platinum and first-class passengers," the gate agent announced. Maya stood up, gathering her belongings with practiced efficiency. As she approached the gate, a flight attendant stepped forward, blocking her path. "Excuse me, ma'am, we're only boarding first class at this time," the attendant said firmly, despite Maya clearly holding up her first-class boarding pass. "Yes, I know. I'm in 2A, Maya replied calmly, keeping her voice steady and professional. She had been through this before, too many times to count. The attendant's face flushed slightly as she checked the boarding pass. "Oh, I'd apologized, Dr. Richardson. Please, go ahead." Walking down the jet bridge, Maya took deep breaths, centering herself. She had learned long ago that getting upset only made things worse. Instead, she focused on the important day ahead, her presentation, the lives her research could save, the doctors she would train. Reaching her seat, Maya stored her bags in the overhead compartment and settled into the comfortable first-class seat. A different flight attendant approached, his name tag reading Robert. "Would you like a pre-departure beverage?" Robert asked, his tone noticeably cooler than when he had served the passenger in one moments before. "Water, please," Maya replied, pulling out her phone to send a quick text to her mother. "Made it on board. Love you, Mom." Her mother always worried about her travels, understanding all too well the challenges her daughter faced. As other passengers boarded, Maya noticed the supple shift in the crew's behavior, the slight stiffening when they passed her seat, the way they avoided eye contact, the forced smiles that didn't reach their eyes. After 15 years of flying first class, she could read these signs like a cardiac monitor. Little did Maya know that this flight would be different from all others. As the plane's doors closed and the engines hummed to life, she couldn't have predicted how the next 5 hours would become a turning point not just in her life, but in the ongoing fight against discrimination in the airline industry. The plane had been in the air for 30 minutes when the first-class drink service began. Maya watched as Robert, the flight attendant, moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency. In seat 1A, an older white man in an expensive suit received a warm smile with his scotch on the rocks. The woman across the aisle got a friendly wink with her champagne. "Orange juice, please," Maya replied, maintaining her professional demeanor. She noticed how Robert placed other passengers' drinks on their tables with care, complete with a napkin and a small packet of nuts. Her juice was set down quickly, some of it sloshing over the edge, no napkin in sight. A few minutes later, the cabin grew chilly, as first-class cabins often did. Maya observed as the passenger in 3C, a young white woman, pressed her call button. Sarah, another flight attendant, rushed over with a pleasant "How can I help you? Could I have a blanket, please?" "Of course." "Just one moment," Sarah replied cheerfully, returning quickly with a neatly folded blanket and even offering to help spread it out. Feeling cold herself, Maya pressed her own call button. This time, Robert appeared, his face set in barely concealed annoyance. "Yes." "Could I have a blanket as well, please?" Robert's lips tightened. "You should have brought your own. We're running low on blankets." Maya glanced around the cabin, noting the stack of blankets clearly visible in the front galley. "I can see several blankets from here," she said quietly. "Those are reserved for other passengers who might need them later," Robert replied, his tone suggesting the conversation was over. He turned away before Maya could respond. The businessman sitting next to Maya in 2B, who had been absorbed in his laptop until now, looked up with a frown. He had witnessed the entire exchange. "That's not right," he muttered, shaking his head. Maya gave him a small smile. "It happens more often than you'd think." A few rows behind them, an elderly couple exchanged concerned glances. The wife whispered something to her husband, who nodded gravely. They had been flying first class for decades and had never heard of reserved blankets. The next hour passed with similar small incidents. When lunch orders were taken, Sarah and Robert worked together, moving through the cabin. Maya noticed how they spent time chatting with other passengers about the menu options, offering recommendations and answering questions. When they reached her, Robert quickly asked, "Chicken or pasta?" before moving on without waiting for her to check the menu card. "I haven't had a chance to look at the menu yet," Maya said. Sarah stepped in, her voice artificially sweet. "We need to get all orders in quickly. Just pick one." Maya remained calm, though her heart rate increased slightly, a reaction she recognized from years of facing similar situations. "I'd like to see the menu first, please. It's part of the first-class service I paid for." Both flight attendants exchanged looks. Robert pulled out a menu and practically dropped it on her tray table. "Make it quick," he said. As Maya read the menu, she could hear Sarah cheerfully discussing wine pairings with the passengers in row 1. The contrast was stark and deliberate. A young Asian woman in 4A had been watching these interactions carefully. Maya noticed her typing something on her phone, occasionally glancing up at the flight attendants. In economy class, a Hispanic flight attendant named Maria Torres passed through the curtain to grab supplies. She paused briefly, observing the tense atmosphere in first class. Maya finally ordered the chicken, which arrived with a noticeable delay compared to other passengers' meals. The presentation was sloppy, the chicken barely warm. She noticed her seat neighbor's pasta dish looked perfectly arranged, steam still rising from the plate. As the meal service continued, Maya quietly documented each interaction in the Notes app on her phone. She had learned long ago that having a record was essential. Timestamps, names, specific quotes. Details that could be easily forgotten but might prove crucial later. What the flight attendants didn't realize was that their actions were creating ripples throughout the cabin. Passengers who had started the flight absorbed in their own worlds were now paying attention. The elderly couple had begun taking discreet photos. The Asian woman was still typing, her face set in determination. And Maria Torres, the economy flight attendant, had made 3 more trips through the curtain, each time lingering a bit longer, her expression growing increasingly concerned. The flight was only halfway to San Francisco, but the tension in first class was building like a thunderstorm. Maya could feel it in the air. This wasn't going to be just another flight where she quietly endured discrimination. Something was different this time, and everyone in the cabin could sense it. 2 hours into the flight, the incident that would change everything began with a simple accident. Maya's seatmate in 2B, Tom Wilson, was working on his laptop while drinking his second cup of coffee. The plane hit a small patch of turbulence. Nothing serious, but enough to make Tom's hand slip. His coffee cup tipped, spilling some of its contents onto Maya's leather laptop bag stored under the seat in front of her. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry," Tom exclaimed, immediately reaching for his napkin. "Let me help clean that up." Maya responded calmly, "Don't worry about it. Accidents happen." She reached down to move her bag, checking to make sure her laptop inside wasn't damaged. That's when Robert and Sarah, the two flight attendants who had been treating her poorly, rushed over as if responding to an emergency. Their sudden appearance was surprising. They hadn't moved this quickly for any other passenger's needs during the entire flight. "What's going on here?" Robert demanded, his voice sharp and loud enough to make nearby passengers look up. "Is there a problem?" Before Maya could explain, Sarah jumped in. "Ma'am, we've had several complaints about disturbances from your seat." This was a complete fabrication. The flight had been peaceful, and Maya had barely spoken except to order her meal. "There's no disturbance," Tom interrupted, looking confused. "I accidentally spilled my coffee. It was entirely my fault." The flight attendants seemed to ignore Tom completely, their attention focused solely on Maya. "If you can't settle down," Robert said, his voice carrying a clear threat, "we'll have to handle this situation." Maya sat perfectly still, her heart racing but her face composed, a skill she had mastered during complex surgeries. "Handle what situation?" she asked quietly. "The gentleman spilled his coffee accidentally. He already apologized. There's nothing to handle." The elderly couple from row 3, Mr. and Mrs. Anderson, had been watching everything unfold. Mrs. Anderson spoke up, her voice carrying the authority of her 70 years. "Young man," she addressed Robert, "I've been sitting right here the whole time. The only disturbance is coming from you two." The Asian woman in 4A, who had been documenting everything since the blanket incident, now held her phone up openly, clearly recording. Several other passengers had their phones out too, capturing the increasingly tense situation. Sarah noticed the recordings and slightly changed her tone, though her words remained hostile. "We have a responsibility to maintain order in the cabin," she said, as if reciting from a manual. "Any aggressive behavior—" "Aggressive?" Tom interrupted again, his face reddening with anger now. "The only aggressive behavior I've seen is coming from the crew. Dr. Richardson has been nothing but professional while you've been treating her poorly this entire flight." Maya finally stood up, her full height of 5'8" commanding attention. Her voice was steady and clear, the same voice she used when teaching medical students. "Let me be very clear about what's happening here. Since boarding, I have experienced discriminatory treatment. I've documented every incident. Now you're trying to create a problem where none exists. I would like both of your names and employee numbers." Robert's face paled slightly. Sarah's artificial smile faltered. They hadn't expected this calm, professional response. From behind the economy curtain, Maria Torres appeared again. She had been watching and listening. This time she spoke up. "I can verify that there have been no disturbances from this seat. I've been paying attention." The solidarity from other passengers and Maria seemed to take Robert and Sarah by surprise. They looked at each other uncertainly, their authority challenged by the growing number of witnesses. "We'll need to file a report about this incident," Sarah said, trying to maintain control of the situation. "Yes, we will," Maya agreed, her voice firm. "I'll be filing a very detailed report. Now, about those employee numbers." The tension in the cabin was thick enough to cut with a scalpel. Other passengers had stopped pretending to sleep or work. All eyes now focused on the unfolding scene. The elderly Mrs. Anderson had her phone out too, recording everything. Tom sat straight in his seat, ready to back up Maya's version of events. Maria Torres stood her ground near the curtain, her presence a silent witness to everything. She had been taking mental notes of her own, preparing to support the truth when the time came. Robert and Sarah retreated to the galley, whispering furiously to each other. They knew the situation had escalated beyond their control, but their prejudice had blinded them to their own role in creating this crisis. The flight was only halfway done, and it was becoming clear that this confrontation was far from over. After the coffee incident, the first-class cabin became a different place. The invisible walls between passengers began to crumble as people started talking to each other in hushed voices. The Asian woman from 4A, whose name was Jenny Chen, moved to the empty seat next to Mrs. Anderson to share the video she had recorded. "I'm a civil rights lawyer," Jenny whispered to Mrs. Anderson. "What they're doing is clearly discrimination. I got everything on video since the blanket incident. Mrs. Anderson nodded firmly. We've been flying first class for 40 years, Harold and I. Never seen anything like this. She patted her husband's hand. Harold here used to be a pilot for Delta. He knows there's no such thing as reserve blankets. In the galley, Maria Torres was pretending to organize drinks while actually taking notes on her phone. As an employee of 12 years, she knew every rule in the flight attendant handbook. Nothing justified Robert and Sarah's behavior. She had already sent a discreet message to her union representative describing what she had witnessed. Tom Wilson, the businessman who had spilled his coffee, was now fully invested in the situation. He had opened his laptop again, but instead of working on his presentation, he was writing a detailed email to his company's travel department. As CEO of a large tech company, his business brought millions in revenue to the airline each year. Dr. Richardson, he said quietly to Maya, would you be willing to speak at our company's Diversity and Inclusion Summit next month? What happened here today? People need to hear about this. Maya was touched by the support but remained focused on documenting everything. She had opened a new note on her phone, typing with practiced precision. 3:15 p.m. Requested employee numbers from Robert and Sarah. Both refused. 3:17 p.m. Maria Torres, economy crew, confirmed no disturbance. 3:20 p.m. Multiple passengers recording incidents. A young man in his 20s from row 5 leaned forward. I've been live streaming since they accused you of causing a disturbance, he said softly. My social media followers are already sharing it. People need to see this. Robert and Sarah had retreated to the front galley, but their whispered argument was visible to everyone. They kept looking back at the cabin, especially when they saw passengers talking to each other. Their usual divide and control tactics weren't working anymore. Mrs. Anderson decided to take action in her own way. She stood up, her silver hair and elegant appearance commanding respect, and walked slowly through the first-class cabin. At each row, she stopped and spoke quietly to the passengers. She was building a list of witnesses, collecting business cards and contact information. Jenny Chen had moved on to talking with a professional athlete in row 1 who had been quiet until now. As a public figure, he said, I have millions of followers. Give me your card. My PR team will want to support this. The solidarity wasn't just limited to first class. Word had spread to economy through Maria Torres. Passengers back there were also recording, capturing the tense atmosphere and the flight attendants' hostile behavior. Every time Robert or Sarah walked past the curtain, dozens of phones lit up. Maya sat calmly in her seat, a steady center in the storm of activity around her. She had faced discrimination before, but this time was different. This time, she wasn't alone. She watched as Mrs. Anderson continued her quiet organizing, as Jenny Chen collected evidence, as Tom Wilson made his calls. Maria Torres found a moment to slip Maya a note. I have documented everything. Here's my personal number. I will testify. The note included a brief list of company policies that Robert and Sarah had violated. By now, the first-class cabin had transformed into a united community. Passengers who had started the flight as strangers were now allies in a cause bigger than themselves. Even those who had initially tried to ignore the situation were now involved, sharing their observations and contact information. The flight was entering its final hours, but the story was just beginning. Through the window, Maya could see the sun starting to set, casting a warm glow over the cabin. In that light, she saw something powerful. People from different backgrounds, ages, and professions, all coming together to stand against injustice. Robert and Sarah must have sensed it too. Their earlier confidence had crumbled in the face of this unexpected unity. They now moved through the cabin quickly, avoiding eye contact, their earlier arrogance replaced by nervous glances at the many phones recording their every move. 3.5 hours into the flight, Maya needed to use the restroom. It was a simple human need that would turn into the most blatant display of discrimination yet. She stood up carefully, avoiding eye contact with Robert and Sarah, who were watching her every move from the galley. As she walked toward the first-class bathroom, Sarah stepped quickly in front of her, blocking the way. I'm sorry, but this lavatory is out of order, she said with a thin smile. Maya looked at the bathroom door. The green vacant sign was clearly visible, and she had seen other passengers use it just minutes before. It seems to be working fine, she replied calmly. There are maintenance issues, Sarah insisted. You'll need to use the facilities in economy class. Right at that moment, the bathroom door opened, and a white passenger from One stepped out. The man gave Maya an apologetic look, having overheard Sarah's words. The bathroom was obviously in perfect working order. Before Maya could respond, Mrs. Anderson's sharp voice cut through the tension. Young lady, she called out to Sarah, I've been watching that bathroom door for the last hour. At least 6 people have used it with no problems. Jenny Chen, the civil rights lawyer, had her phone out again. This is a direct violation of federal aviation regulations, she stated clearly, making sure her recording captured every word. Denying access to facilities based on racial discrimination. Tom Wilson stood up from his seat. This is ridiculous, he said loudly. Dr. Richardson is a first-class passenger. She has every right to use this bathroom. Robert rushed over, trying to control the situation. Ma'am, if you're going to cause another disturbance. Another disturbance. Maria Torres had appeared from economy class again. There was never a first disturbance, and you know it, Robert. The professional athlete in row 1 was now live streaming again. Y'all seeing this? He said to his phone. They won't let this lady use the bathroom because of her race. First-class ticket, paying customer, and they're making up fake maintenance issues. Other passengers had started to gather around, forming a protective circle around Maya. Mrs. Anderson's husband, Harold, spoke up for the first time, his voice carrying the authority of his years as a pilot. In 30 years of flying, I'd never seen such unprofessional behavior from a crew. Maya stood tall, her voice steady despite the humiliation of having to fight for something as basic as using the bathroom. I'd like to speak to the captain, she said firmly. The captain is busy flying the plane, Sarah snapped. The captain is also responsible for passenger safety and well-being, Maria countered. And I've already sent a message to the cockpit about this situation. Jenny Chen stepped forward. Under FAA regulations, the captain needs to be informed of any situation that could affect passenger safety or comfort. This qualifies. The tension in the cabin had reached its peak. Other passengers from economy class had gathered near the curtain, witnessing the scene. Phones were recording from every angle. The Yum social media influencers' livestream had already gathered thousands of viewers. Suddenly, a new voice crackled over the intercom. This is your captain speaking. Would all cabin crew please report to the galley for a brief meeting? Robert and Sarah exchanged nervous glances. Their faces had lost their arrogant expressions, replaced by growing concern. They had never expected their discriminatory actions to escalate to this level. Maria gave Maya a small nod before heading to the galley. The other passengers stayed close, ensuring Maya could finally use the bathroom without interference. Mrs. Anderson patted her hand as she passed. We're all witnesses, dear, she said softly. When Maya returned to her seat, the atmosphere in the cabin had shifted again. The captain's voice had disappeared, but its effect remained. Robert and Sarah emerged from the galley looking shaken. They moved through the cabin mechanically, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Jenny Chen was now typing rapidly on her laptop. I'm drafting a formal complaint to the FAA, she explained to those around her. This isn't just about airline policy violation anymore. This is about civil rights. Tom Wilson had his phone out too. My company's legal team is already involved, he said. They're waiting for us to land. Maya sat quietly, feeling both drained and strengthened. The bathroom incident had been humiliating, but the support from her fellow passengers had shown her something important. Times were changing. People weren't willing to be silent witnesses to discrimination anymore. After the bathroom incident, Maya knew it was time to take control of the situation. She pulled out her tablet and opened a new document, her fingers moving swiftly across the screen. Years of writing medical reports had taught her the importance of detailed documentation. Excuse me, she called out calmly to Robert as he passed by. I need your full name and employee number for my report. Robert froze mid-step. His face showed a mix of anger and fear. I'm not required to. Actually, you are. Jenny Chen interrupted from her seat. According to airline regulations, all crew members must provide their identification when formally requested by a passenger. Maya continued typing as she spoke. I'm documenting that at 4:15 p.m., Flight attendant Robert refused to provide his employee information after a direct request. Other passengers had their phones out again, recording this new interaction. The young social media influencer's livestream count had grown to over 10,000 viewers. Comments were flooding in, with people demanding action from the airline. Mrs. Anderson pulled out a small notebook from her purse. "I've been flying for 40 years, she announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Here are the names and contact information of 23 passengers who witnessed the discrimination today. We're all willing to testify." Tom Wilson was on his phone again, speaking quietly but firmly. "Yes, I want the company's entire travel account reviewed. No, I'm witnessing active discrimination right now. Yes, I'll hold for the executive team." Maya remained focused on her documentation. She opened the airline's website on her tablet and began citing specific company policies that have been violated. Denial of standard first-class services. Discriminatory access to facilities. Failure to provide employee identification. False accusations of passenger misconduct. Unequal treatment in service delivery. Maria Torres, still moving between economy and first class, slipped Maya another note. This one contained the flight number, tail number, and other technical details that would be needed for formal complaints. She had also included the names of 2 other crew members who had witnessed Robert and Sarah's behavior. The professional athlete in row 1 was now doing a live interview with a major news network through his phone. "I'm watching systematic discrimination happen in real time," he said. "This isn't just about one flight. This is about a bigger problem that needs to be addressed." Jenny Chen had moved to sit closer to Maya. "I'm drafting a legal brief," she explained. "The airline needs to understand that this isn't going away. We have multiple witnesses, video evidence, and documented violations of federal aviation regulations." Maya nodded, continuing her own documentation. She pulled up her medical credentials on her tablet, proof of her professional status that Robert and Sarah had chosen to ignore. She added details about her frequent flyer status, her regular first-class travel history, and her perfect passenger record. From economy class, more support emerged. A college professor sent a note forward offering to write about the incident in her upcoming book about modern discrimination. A tech developer had created a hashtag that was already trending on social media. Sarah appeared briefly, her earlier hostility replaced by nervous glances at the many phones recording her every move. She tried to offer Maya a drink, but her forced smile couldn't hide her discomfort. "No, thank you," Maya replied professionally. "I'm noting the time as 4:45 p.m., and this is the first offer of beverage service since the initial discrimination was reported." The captain's voice came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're about an hour from San Francisco. I've been made aware of some situations in the cabin, and I want to assure you that all passenger complaints are being taken very seriously." Robert and Sarah retreated to the galley after this announcement. Through the galley curtain, passengers could see them making urgent phone calls, likely to their union representatives or airline management. Maya continued her methodical documentation. Each incident, each witness, each violation carefully noted and time-stamped. Her medical training had taught her the importance of precise records, and now those skills were serving a different but equally important purpose. The resistance wasn't loud or violent. It was calm, professional, and thoroughly documented. With every passing minute, more evidence was gathered, more witnesses came forward, and more support built around Maya. The power dynamic had shifted, and everyone on the plane knew it. As Flight AA-673 began its descent into San Francisco, the reality of their situation finally seemed to hit Robert and Sarah. Through the galley curtain, passengers could see them huddled over their phones, faces pale as they scrolled through social media. The hashtag AA673 discrimination was trending nationwide, with the professional athletes' live-stream clips being shared by major news outlets. Maya watched as Sarah whispered something to Robert, who shook his head frantically. Their earlier arrogance had vanished, replaced by the dawning realization that their actions would have consequences beyond this flight. "Dr. Richardson," Maria Torres said quietly, approaching Maya's seat, "I've been a flight attendant for 12 years. What happened today? It's not right. I've documented everything, and I'm willing to be a witness." She handed Maya a detailed written statement, her hand slightly shaking. This could cost me my job, but some things are more important. Maya took the statement, touched by Maria's courage. Thank you, but I'll make sure you're protected as a whistleblower. Jenny Chen, who had been working on her laptop throughout the flight, looked up. She's right, Maria. The Railway Labor Act has specific protections for airline employees who report misconduct. I'll represent you pro bono if needed. The mood in the cabin had shifted dramatically. Passengers who had been strangers 5 hours ago were now exchanging contact information, organizing their evidence, and planning their next steps. Mrs. Anderson had compiled a complete list of witnesses, while her husband Harold used his pilot experience to note specific aviation regulation violations. Tom Wilson ended another phone call with a satisfied expression. Our company just canceled our corporate contract with the airline, he announced quietly to those around him. That's about $3 million in annual revenue they just lost. Sometimes money is the only language corporations understand. The professional athlete was still engaging with his followers, his voice carrying authority as he spoke. This isn't just about one flight or one incident. This is about systemic problems that need to be addressed. Change happens when people stand together. Robert and Sarah finally emerged from the galley, their demeanor completely transformed. They moved through the cabin with exaggerated politeness, offering drinks and snacks that should have been provided hours ago. Would you like anything, Dr. Richardson? Sarah asked, her voice artificially sweet. Maya looked up from her tablet, where she was still documenting every interaction. No, thank you. I'm noting the time as 5:45 p.m., and this is your first voluntary offer of service since the initial incidents. The young social media influencer chuckled. The comments on my live stream are calling them out for this fake niceness now. Too little, too late. Through the windows, the San Francisco skyline was becoming visible. As the plane descended, Jenny Chen finished her legal brief. We have enough evidence for a civil rights lawsuit, she told Maya. But more importantly, we have enough public pressure to force real policy changes. Maria Torres made one final pass through the cabin, quietly collecting business cards from passengers willing to testify. The stack of cards grew thick. Not a single passenger had refused to help. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Flight attendants, prepare for landing. There was a pause then, and I want all crew members to report to my office immediately after we arrive at the gate. Robert and Sarah exchanged worried glances. Their attempts at damage control had come too late. The videos were already viral, the witnesses were organized, and the evidence was overwhelming. Mrs. Anderson patted Maya's hand. You handled this with such grace, dear. When I was young, we had to stay quiet about these things, but not anymore. Not today. As the plane touched down at San Francisco International Airport, Maya looked around the cabin. She saw Maria Torres standing tall despite her fears. She saw Jenny Chen organizing her legal documents. She saw Tom Wilson making plans for corporate action. She saw the elderly Andersons with their list of witnesses. She saw the young influencer still sharing the story with his followers. This wasn't just about one flight anymore. It wasn't even just about one airline. What had started as yet another instance of discrimination had transformed into something bigger, a moment when people from all walks of life had chosen to stand together against injustice. The seatbelt sign dinged off, but nobody rushed to get up. There was an unspoken understanding that this journey wasn't over yet. It was, in many ways, just beginning. 1 week after Flight AA 673 landed in San Francisco, Maya sat in her office at the hospital, looking at her computer screen. The video of her experience had reached over 10 million views. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing with interview requests from major news networks. But Maya wasn't interested in fame. She was focused on the email she had just received from the airline CEO, marking the beginning of real change. Dear Dr. Richardson, following the unacceptable incidents on Flight AA 673, we are implementing immediate changes to our airline policies and training programs. The changes were significant. The airline announced mandatory anti-bias training for all staff, created a new passenger advocacy office, and established clear penalties for discriminatory behavior. Robert and Sarah had been suspended pending a full investigation. Maria Torres had been promoted to lead a new committee on diversity and inclusion within the airline. Her bravery in speaking up had earned her recognition instead of punishment. She sent Maya regular updates about the positive changes happening inside the company. "You won't believe the difference," Maria wrote in her latest message. "New crew members are being trained differently. Old habits are being questioned. People are speaking up when they see something wrong." Jenny Chen's legal action had led to a settlement, but not the kind that disappeared behind closed doors. The airline agreed to public oversight of their reforms and regular reporting on their progress. The money from the settlement went to establishing a scholarship fund for minority students interested in aviation careers. Tom Wilson had kept his word about the corporate impact. Other companies followed his lead, demanding written commitments to anti-discrimination policies before renewing their business contracts with airlines. The financial pressure forced other airlines to examine their own practices. Mrs. Anderson had become an unexpected social media star. Her passionate speech about witnessing discrimination had gone viral, touching people across generations. She now ran a popular blog about standing up against injustice, proving that activism had no age limit. A professional athlete used his platform to keep the conversation going. He invited Maya to speak at halftime during a major game, reaching millions of sports fans with her story. The young social media influencer's followers had grown from thousands to millions, all engaged in discussions about creating positive change. Maya's medical conference presentation, her original reason for the flight, had gone perfectly, but she'd added something new to her speech about heart surgery techniques. She talked about another kind of healing needed in society. "Medicine taught me to look for root causes," she told her audience. "When we see symptoms of discrimination, we need to treat the underlying condition, not just the surface problems." The airline industry took notice. Other carriers began reviewing their policies, realizing they could be next in the spotlight. Training programs were updated, reporting systems were improved, and passenger rights were strengthened across the board. 3 months after the flight, Maya received another email. A major airline had created a passenger advisory board and wanted her to lead it. Her experience would help shape policies to prevent discrimination and ensure equal treatment for all passengers. Harold Anderson, the former pilot, worked with current pilots to create new guidelines for handling discrimination reports. His decades of experience helped bridge the gap between old airline culture and modern expectations. The hashtag AA673 discrimination had evolved into hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack, then into hashtag #EqualSkays. People shared their own stories, creating a movement that went beyond one incident on one flight. 6 months later, Maya boarded another flight. The difference was noticeable immediately. The crew was diverse, their training evident in their professional and equal treatment of all passengers. A framed passenger rights document hung at the front of the cabin, listing clear procedures for reporting any concerns. As she settled into her seat, Maya opened her tablet to review some patient files. A flight attendant approached with a warm, genuine smile. "Dr. Richardson, I just wanted to say thank you. Your story changed things for all of us." Maya looked around the cabin. She saw passengers of all backgrounds being treated with equal respect. She saw crew members working with new confidence and professionalism. She saw the visible signs of change that one moment of resistance had created. The incident on Flight AA673 had been painful, but its impact reached far beyond that day. It had become a catalyst for change, a moment when people decided that silence was no longer an option. The skies were becoming more equal, one flight at a time.